So I ended up being a journalist after a law struggle, to cut the story short. And I ended up working for a newspaper and then end up on radio. And I thought, you know what, everything is going well. I'm becoming what I want to be, and I'm writing stories, I'm telling people stories. But most of the time, as I was in the media industry, I started to realize that, you know, our editorial was highly controlled, and we were not free to really tell the stories as they are. And unfortunately, that brought me into, when I started to speak up against this and trying to make sure that my stories are not censored, but they are properly edited, I started getting in trouble, and I started having problems with the police, and in the long run, I lost confidence with my country. I was starting to get in trouble, and I was seeing the police were following me. I could see I was being spied on. So I ended up leaving my country, and I ended up in the USA to understudy a project. And this project was basically a transitional home. My intention was to do a project, a transitional home for people who have gone through my situation, because I knew that people who are thrown into these prisons, they don't get any reintegration program whatsoever. So basically what happened, I wanted to initiate something like that can bring them to be reintegrated with the society and to be reconciled with the society and the society with them. This excerpt here is going to deal mainly with when I was in the courts. Inside the dock, I struggled. The dock is like, you know, the dock, place where the judge, where the accused person sits. So inside the dock, I struggled with my fears, making an effort to display courage, but it was to no avail. The fear caused my whole body to shake severely. Exerting great effort, I tried to speak, but only mumbled a few words and stopped. For a few moments, I stood there perplexed and quivering. Deep inside, I burned with desire to speak about the injustices perpetrated against me by the uncaring government of Botswana. Here is what I might have said had I been an empowered citizen, well versed in the legal technicalities surrounding my life. My lordship, I have been wrongfully charged. Since the police officers used brute force against me, I had no choice but to do and say everything they wanted me to say. The police officers did not accord me my right to remain silent and to speak only after seeking legal counsel. In due course of pre-trial procedures, they tortured and violently coerced me to enter an involuntary, unequivocal plea of guilt. I cooperated and displayed remorse, since I knew very well the deadly ramifications of resisting this police officer's force. However, this was not the root source of my troubles, but rather was a symptom of my struggle to survive in a tribal village called Mochudi that was notorious for its forced tribal initiation school, at which young people of my age were subjected to compulsory male and female circumcision. These were also some symptoms of my struggle to survive in a community defined by a weak civil society, which was ruled by the constant fear of ritual human killers who went about harvesting the organs of their victims with impunity. Most of these victims were young people like I was. My father was a tribally oriented man, initiated at the very same tribal village school, where he seemed to have been accorded a supreme right to batter my mother. As a conventional proponent of the tribal initiation school, he harbored ambitions to forcibly enroll all of his children into this school, where forced circumcision carried out in the bush by medically untrained people using unsterilized knives was the norm. My father also seemed to be oblivious to the fact that the ritual killings in the village were carried out by an unknown syndicate suspected to be linked with the tribal authorities who were running the tribal initiation school. Despite the hazards for my life and health, my father thought it was worthwhile to force me to join the school. Two of my sisters, who had been forcibly enrolled in the girls' initiation school, were exposed to women's circumcision. What did the responsible government do to protect them? Can this call tell me, in essence, how women get circumcised? What purpose does this obscene act carried out on pubescent girls serve? What God has created no man should destroy? I had no choice but to dissent against my parents' attempt to forcibly enroll me into this initiation school, and I seriously risked my life by going against the tribal authorities' decision. I had a moral responsibility not to just sit back and watch this violence unfold while no one did anything about it. Not that I blamed the village people for being complacent in the status quo. They were scared of the tribal authorities just as much as I was. However, I had no choice but to struggle against these injustices. Therefore, I could not help but harbor non-violent intentions to reveal the cruel and unjust tribal authorities to the government by joining a group of university students who had been asking government to intervene. Unfortunately, the government of Botswana turned a blind eye on this matter. The thought of my two sisters having been treated so inhumanly at the initiation school troubled me, especially the fact that the culprits got away with impunity. When it was my turn to be enrolled in the initiation school, my father was determined to make sure that I complied. Vigilant as I was, I saw from far away the tribal men who were sent to get me. It took me a few seconds to jump over the backyard fence and run away. They tracked me around the village for several days. I did not hide and sleep. I had to hide and sleep in culverts since I could not go back home, where they could easily have nabbed me. They hunted me around the village as if I had committed a crime by refusing to go have my penis skinned by a tribal elder who did not care about the pain he would inflict on me, an elder who did not respect my right to say no to something being done to my body. One was not supposed to even cry or express a feeling of pain during the circumcision period. If you expressed your feelings, you got rebuked and punished for not being man enough. Fortunately, the regime failed to catch me. I was lucky because they would have brutalized me with the sticks and whips which they were carrying, as they always did to whoever tried to defy their authority. For about 2 weeks, I lived in hiding while attending public high school at the same time. The regime never came over to nab me while inside this government school premises. Our public school system was still colonially oriented, and I was in the first generation born of parents who were Botswana's victims of colonization under the auspices of British protection. My teachers at school were not concerned about the distressed look on my face. They mocked me about my dirty and torn school uniform. During the course of my hiding from the tribal regime, I had very little or nothing at all to eat, since I no longer had any parental support. My parents more or less disowned me since I had disobeyed them. My mother had not been in support of the tribal authorities, but since she was a woman, she had no choice but to do whatever her husband said. She was one of the village's most battered women, and she never stood up against my father or voiced her feelings. My mother's constant beating jeopardized her health, and she lived most of her life in pain and sorrow. Whenever we, her children, tried to speak out against my father beating her, she would insist that we let him kill her. You can imagine how traumatic that was to us. Even now, I still do not understand what strategy or logic she was trying to use by saying that. My guess is that this was what she was taught at the girls' initiation school, that women should not question their husbands in anything, even when this husband performed inhumane acts. None of my siblings could tell you that he or she does not have physical and emotional scars from my father. In all these violating incidents, where was the so-called responsible government of Botswana? Why did this government fail to protect us from all these abuses? I had a moral responsibility to take a stand against these injustices. One of my hiding spots was the building that housed our one and only village library. This small building always welcomed me and provided a peaceful atmosphere, as well as nourishing learning environment.